Welcome to the Jaybefaunt channel. I am your host, James Fauntleroy. So good to see all of you here on this beautiful day. The Jaybefaunt channel is available on all major podcast platforms, so go ahead and subscribe there. Also part of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, so you can find me there on Sundays and Thursdays. So good to see all of you here joining me on this beautiful day. Now, if you guys have not already, you guys can subscribe to my Substack at jaybefaunt.substack.com so you guys can get notified whenever I go live, upload clips, or write any articles. So you got it right there. So thank you so very much for that as well. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and like, share, and sub, because guess what? That pushes me out into the algorithm, and then you get to see a little bit more of me. See how it goes? All right. So what are we doing today? Just to share with you guys, we are continuing the reading of The Will to Change Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks. This is going to be a great reading because we're getting into chapter 2. And I was debating with myself about reading this entire chapter or breaking it up in two, but this chapter was just so juicy. It was so good. So this chapter is entitled, chapter 2 is Understanding Patriarchy. Some of you guys are kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to listen to this. I'm going to tell you right now, my dudes, y'all need to listen to this one. Like real talk. Y'all gonna want to listen to this because it's not. You know what's funny? A lot of times, men, when they hear people, especially women, say the word patriarchy, that is almost like a signal to us, like, oh, they're about to bash men. That's exactly what's about to happen. It's not what she's doing here. Just, stay with me. This is going to be really interesting. And ladies, women, I need you to stick around for this one too. Because there's some good lessons to be learned as well. There's some lessons to be learned from all of us, including myself. Now, we're going to get into this and just let's have an open mind, shall we? All right. So, page 17, chapter 2. Understanding Patriarchy. Patriarchy is the single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in our nation. Like I said, you don't play around. Yet most men do not use the word patriarchy in everyday life. Most men never think about patriarchy, what it means, how it's created and sustained. Many men in our nation would not be able to spell the word or pronounce it correctly. The word patriarchy just is not a part of their normal everyday thought or speech. Men who have heard and know the word usually associate it with women's liberation with feminism, and therefore dismiss it as irrelevant to their own experiences. I have been standing at podiums and talking about patriarchy for more than 30 years. It is a word I use daily, and men who hear me use it often ask me what I meant by it. Nothing discounts the old anti-feminist projection of men as all-powerful more than their basic ignorance of a major facet of the political system that shapes and informs male identity and sense of self from birth until death. I often use the phrase imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy to describe the interlocking political systems that are the foundation of our nation's politics. If these systems, the one that we all learn the most about growing up is the system of patriarchy. Even if we never know the word, because patriarchal gender roles are assigned to us as children, and we are given continual guidance about the ways we can best fulfill these roles. Patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything, and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak, and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. When my older brother and I were born with a year separating us in age, patriarchy determined how we would each be regarded by our parents. Both our parents believed in patriarchy. They have been taught patriarchal thinking through religion. Ooh. So, first off, she gives the definition of how, patriarchy and how it's applied even within our system. In fact, she uses the phrase imperialist, which our nation is, right? White supremacist, that's for damn sure. And then capitalist, oh yeah, and patriarchy. But this all like feeds into each other, right? In my view, and some people may disagree on the left, and that's okay. But from my view, it's like capitalism kind of bleeds into all this, right? Could I be wrong? Some people may want to tell me, JB, you're wrong, and that's okay. We can have that argument. But it feels like to me that capitalism is really the overarching issue that informs and pushes these different systems as well. But that's a whole nother conversation. So let's continue. At church, they had learned that God created man to rule the world and everything in it, and that it was the work of women to help men perform these tasks, to obey, and to always assume a subordinate role in relation to a powerful man. They were taught that God was male. These teachings were reinforced in every institution they encountered: schools, courthouses, clubs, sports arenas, as well as churches. Embracing patriarchal thinking like everyone else around them. They taught it to their children because it seemed like a natural way to organize life. As their daughter, I was taught that it was my role to serve, to be weak, to be free from the burden of thinking, to caretake and nurture others. My brother was taught that his role was to be served, to provide, to be strong, to think, strategize, to plan, and to refuse to caretake or nurture others. I was taught that it was not proper for female to be violent, that it was unnatural. My brother was taught that his value would be determined by his will to do violence, albeit in appropriate settings. He was taught that for a boy, enjoying violence was a good thing, albeit in appropriate settings. He was taught that a boy should not express feelings. I was taught that girls could and should express feelings, or at least some of them. When I responded with rage at being denied a toy, I was taught that as a girl in a patriarchal household, that rage was not an appropriate feminine feeling. That it should not only be that it should be not only expressed, but to be eradicated. When my brother responded with rage at being denied a toy, he was taught as a boy in a patriarchal household that his ability to express rage was good, but that he had to learn the best setting to unleash his hostility. It was not good for him to use his rage to oppose the wishes of his parents. But later, when he grew up, he was taught that rage was permitted and that allowing rage to provoke him to violence would help him protect home and nation. We live in the farm country, isolated from other people. Our sense of gender roles was learned from our parents, from the ways we saw them behave. My brother and I remember our confusion about gender. In reality, I was stronger and more violent than my brother, which we learned quickly was bad. And he was a gentle, peaceful boy, which we learned was really bad. Although we were often confused, Yeah, although we were often confused, we knew one fact for certain: we could not be and act the way we wanted to, doing what we felt like. It was clear to us that our behavior had to follow a predetermined gendered script. We both learned the word patriarchy in our adult life when we learned that the script had determined what we should be. The identities we should make was based on patriarchal values and beliefs about gender. I was always more interested in challenging patriarchy than my brother was, because it was the system that was always leaving me out of things that I wanted to be a part of. In our family life in the 50s, marbles were a boys' game. My brother had inherited his marbles from the men in the family. He had it in a tin box to keep them in, all sizes and shapes, marvelously colored. They were, to my eye, the most beautiful objects. We played together with them, often with me aggressively clinging to the marble I liked best, refusing to share. When Dad was at work, our stay-at-home mom was quite content to see us playing marbles together. Yet Dad, looking at our play from a patriarchal perspective, was disturbed by what he saw. His daughter, aggressive and competitive, was a better player than the son. His son was passive. The boy did not really seem to care who won and was willing to give over marbles on demand. Dad decided that this play had to end, that both my brother and I needed to learn a lesson about appropriate gender roles. This reminds me, back in the day, um, as a little boy, I actually really liked stuffed animals. I love plush stuffed animals. And I had a few, right? And so I grew up in a single parent household. It was me and my brothers and my mom. And I remember one time going up to New Jersey to visit my grandparents for the summer. And my grandmother was out, and my grandfather was home with me and my brother. And the neighbor, little girl, she wanted to give me one of her stuffed animals. Now, I didn't just take it because, even though it was offered to me, I said, let me ask my grandfather first. So I went to him and I asked him, I said, Pop, the neighbors, she wants to give me her stuffed animal that I can have. I was 7. And according to him, no, I couldn't. Number one, he felt I was too old. Number two, I was a boy. And so I was sad because I couldn't get that stuffed animal. But why couldn't I? Like, why is it looked down upon if a man wants a plush toy? Or a little boy wants to play? Like, what if he's 10, 11 years old, but he still has plush toys? Why is that bad? Like, you know, does that signify him as being developmentally behind? I don't think so. But it makes you think, right? Just saying. One evening, my brother was given permission by my dad to bring out the tin of marbles. I announced my desire to play and was told by my brother that girls did not play with marbles and that it was a boys' game. This made no sense to my 4 or 5-year-old mind. I insisted on my right to play by picking up marbles and shooting them. Dad intervened and tell me to stop. I did not listen. His voice grew louder and louder. Then suddenly he snatched me up, broke a board from our screen door, and began to beat me with it, telling me, "You're just a little girl. When I tell you to do something, I meant for you to do it." He beat me, and he beat me, wanting me to acknowledge that I understood what I had done. His rage, his violence captured everyone's attention. Our family sat spellbound, wrapped before the pornography of patriarchal violence. After this beating, I was banished, forced to stay alone in the dark. Mama came into the bedroom to soothe the pain, telling me in her soft southern voice, I tried to warn you. You need to accept that you're just a little girl, and girls can't do what boys do. In service to patriarchy, her task was to reinforce that dad had done the right thing by putting me in my place, by restoring the natural social order. I remember this traumatic event so well because it was a story told again and again within our family. No one cared that the consistent retelling might trigger post traumatic stress. The retelling was necessary to reinforce both the message and the remembered state of absolute powerlessness. The recollection of this brutal whipping of a little girl daughter by a big, strong man served as more than just a reminder to me of my gendered place. It was a reminder to everyone watching, remembering, to all my siblings, male and female, and to our grown woman mother, that our patriarchal father was the ruler in our household. We were to remember that if we did not obey his rules, we would be punished even unto death. This was the way we were experientially schooled in the art of patriarchy. There's nothing unique or even experiential about this experience. Listen to the voices of the wounded grown children raised in patriarchal homes, and you will hear different versions of the same underlying theme: the use of violence to reinforce our indoctrination and acceptance of patriarchy. In How Can I Get Through to You, family therapist Terrence Real tells how his sons were initiated into patriarchal thinking even as their parents worked to create a loving home in which anti-patriarchal values prevailed. He tells of how his young son Alexander enjoyed dressing as Barbie until boys playing with his older brother witnessed his Barbie persona and let him know by their gaze and their shocked, disapproving silence that his behavior was unacceptable. It reads, without a shred of malevolence, the stare at my son received transmitted a message. You are not to do this. And the medium that message was broadcast in was a potent emotion: shame. At 3, Alexander was learning the rules. A 10-second wordless transaction was powerful enough to dissuade my son from that instant forward from what had been a favorite activity. I call such moments of induction the normal traumatization of boys. To indoctrinate boys into the rules of patriarchy, we force them to feel pain and to deny their feelings. Every single man in this chat that's watching right now pretty much can tell that moment of when we were told to not be ourselves because we weren't being boy enough or man enough. We all can talk about it. We all can cite the age we were when that happened. And typically between the ages of 8 and 10, that's when it happens. How many times growing up where you see a boy that's a little bit effeminate, right? Where the parents or the aunties or the uncles or the grandparents will look at him and go, he's acting a little. Why does that matter though? Why does it gotta matter? Like, why is that an issue? Even if he does act like he got a little sugar in his tank, so Does that affect his honesty, his altruism? Does that affect his ability to make friends? Does that affect his communication? How does that affect him in any negative way? My stories took place in the 50s. The stories Real tells are recent. They all underscore the tyranny of patriarchal thinking, the power of patriarchal culture to hold us captive. Real is one of the most enlightened thinkers on the subject of patriarchal masculinity in our nation, and yet he lets readers know that he is not able to keep his boys out of the patriarchy's reach. They suffer its assaults, as do all boys and girls to a greater or lesser degree. No doubt by creating a loving home that is not patriarchal, Real at least offers his boys a choice. They can choose to be themselves, or they can choose conformity with patriarchal roles. Real uses the phrase psychological patriarchy to describe the patriarchal thinking coming to females and males. Despite the contemporary visionary feminist thinking that makes clear that patriarchal thinker need not be a male, most folks continue to see men as the problem of patriarchy. This is simply not the case. Women can be as wedded to patriarchal thinking and action as men. Oh, here we get to the point that I wanted women to hear. That you, yes, you, lady, yes, you, ma'am, yes, you, sis, y'all can perpetuate patriarchal thinking just like men. This also needs some reflection. See, this ain't just letting women off the hook. Look, Bell Hook says, we gotta, ladies, we gotta talk too. Everybody, just like as a black person, can I have internalized white supremacy? Yes. Just like I, as a black person, can have internalized white supremacy, or I can have internalized homophobia, right? Just because I'm gay doesn't mean I can't have internalized homophobia. Women can also have internalized patriarchy. I'll let your boy. Interesting, right? Are we decolonizing our minds? Are we taking the patriarchy out of our minds? But that whole thing about gender roles, it's like, why do these roles exist? Is it really the natural order of things? Because people will be like, oh, well, there's just some things that women can't do. If I've seen a woman do it, then that means it can't be done. It's just like, for instance, in the household, people will go, well, this is your role. Why does it have to be my role to do these specific things in the household? Do you know how many industrious women I have met that can put stuff together, that can fix stuff around the house? Why is it got to be a dude that does it? Why is it got to be the dude that moves stuff? Like, there's this one lady, she's a power lifter. I forget her name. Look, I'm like, ma'am, you lift the couch while I vacuum underneath it. No, you're the strong one. You're the one best suited for the job, right? Why has it got to be this particular role that happens within the household? It doesn't make sense to me. Like, for instance, if I were straight, right? I'm a cook. I know how to cook. If I'm with a woman and she don't know how to cook, well, who's going to do most of the cooking in the household? Bingo. Right? Why has it got to be that way? Right? If it needs to be done in the house, then just do it. Just make sure it gets done. It ain't got to be no, oh, that's your role. What? It ain't got to be no damn role. Look, this whole idea of gender roles is like, why do we have to have roles? This ain't no play. Am I reading from Shakespeare or some shit? No. It's my role. Did I audition for this? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense, you know? Like some of us work better at cleaning. You know? Some of us are better at it. Some of us are better at cooking. Some of us are more nurturing than some women. Men can be nurturers too. Women can be protectors too. Have you ever seen a woman when her baby gets threatened? You don't think they can't protect? Threaten the kid around his mama. Please. There's a reason why they call it Mama Bear. Anyway. Psychotherapist John Bradshaw's clear-sighted definitions of patriarchy in Creating Love is a useful one. The dictionary defines patriarchy as a social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan of family in both domestic and religious functions. Patriarchy is characterized by male domination and power. He states further that patriarchal rules still govern most of the world's religious, school systems, and family systems. Describing the most damaging of these rules, Bradshaw lists blind obedience, the foundation upon which patriarchy stands, the repression of all emotions except fear, the destruction of individual willpower, and the repression of thinking whenever it departs from the authority figure's way of thinking. Patriarchal thinking shapes the values of our culture. We are socialized into the system, females as well as males. Most of us learn patriarchal attitudes in our family of origin, and they were usually taught to us by our mothers. This attitude were reinforced in schools and religious institutions. The contemporary presence of female-headed households has led to many people to assume that children in these households were not learning patriarchal values because no male is present. They assume that men are the sole teachers of patriarchal thinking, yet many female-headed households endorse and promote patriarchal thinking with far greater passion than the two-parent households because they do not have an experiential reality to challenge false fantasies of gender roles. Women in such households are far more likely to idealize the patriarchal male role and patriarchal men than are women who live with patriarchal men every day. We need to highlight the role women play in perpetuating and sustaining patriarchal culture so that we will recognize patriarchy as a system women and men support equally, even if men receive more rewards from that system. Dismantling and changing patriarchal culture is work that men and women must do together. So yes, this goes to show that yes, women can also push and perpetuate patriarchy. I'm going to give you guys an example. There was a video of a celebrity. They had their child. It was the mom and the son, right? And he was a little bit effeminate, right? The women were coming into the chat talking about, where's the father? Why he acting like that? Why he acting all effeminate? The women were in the chat talking about that. Or there was another one where there was a woman and she had her nephew. And the nephew wanted to try on makeup. And so she did his makeup. I can't tell you how many women came into the chat or was the comments of that tweet and were berating not only the woman for doing the makeup on the boy, but berating the boy for wearing makeup. And it's funny because we want men to be more sensitive to the feelings of women, to be more expressive of their feelings, until we actually start doing it. And I'm not saying this of all women, because there are many women who actually do really feel that we should. But this is where the internalized patriarchy actually can be damaging for women as well. How many boys out there wanted the easy bake oven back in the day, but we were told that we can't have it because we're boys? Yet, we get jobs when we're 16, 17, 18, and we start working at a fast food restaurant. We may go to culinary school, then we end up becoming chefs. So that not allowing us to express our passion via the easy bake oven, we still end up going that same direction of being cooks. By the way, if you go to any restaurant, who's the gender that's most likely in the back that's doing all the cooking? When I say the word chef, which gender comes to you in your head? And yet it's supposed to be the women that are in the kitchen. Clearly, we cannot dismantle systems as long as we engage in collective denial about its impact in our lives. Patriarchy requires male dominance by any means necessary, hence it supports, promotes, and condones sexist violence. We hear the most about sexist violence in public discourse about rape and abuse by domestic partners. But the most common forms of patriarchal violence are those that take place in the home between patriarchal parents and children. The point of such violence is usually to reinforce a dominator model in which the authority figure is deemed ruler over those without power and given the right to maintain that rule through practices of subjugation, subordination, and submission. Keeping males and females from telling the truth about what happens to them in families is one way patriarchal culture is maintained. A great majority of individuals enforce an unspoken rule in the culture as a whole that demands that we keep the secrets of patriarchy, thereby protecting the rule of the father. This rule of silence is upheld when the culture refuses everyone easy access to the word patriarchy. Most children do not learn what to call this system of institutionalized gender roles. So rarely do we name it in everyday speech. The silence promotes denial. And how can we organize to challenge and change a system that cannot be named? There's no accident that feminists began to use the word patriarchy to replace the more commonly used male chauvinism and sexism. These courageous voices want men and women to become more aware of the way patriarchy affects us all. And in popular culture, the word itself was hardly used during the heyday of contemporary feminism. Anti-male activists were no more eager than their sexist male counterparts to emphasize the system of patriarchy and the way it works. For to do so would have automatically exposed the notion that men were all powerful and women were powerless, that all men were oppressive and women always and only victims. By placing the blame for the perpetuation of sexism solely on men, these women could maintain their own allegiance to patriarchy, their own lust for power. They masked their longing to be dominators by taking on the mantle of victimhood. Like many visionary radical feminists, I challenged the misguided notion put forward by women who were simply fed up with male exploitation and oppression that men were the enemy. As early as 1984, I included a chapter with the title Men, Comrades in Struggle in my book, Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center, urging advocates of feminist politics to challenge any rhetoric which placed the sole blame for perpetuating patriarchy and male domination onto men. It says separatist ideology encourages women to ignore the negative impact of sexism on male personhood. It stresses polarization between the sexes. According to Joy Justice, separatists believe that there are two basic perspectives on the issue of naming the victims of sexism. There is a perspective that men oppress women, and there is a perspective that people are people and we are all hurt by rigid sex roles. Both perspectives accurately describe our predicament. Men do oppress women. People are hurt by rigid sexist role patterns. These two realities coexist. Male oppression of women cannot be excused by the recognition that there are ways that men are hurt by rigid sexist roles. Feminist activists should acknowledge that hurt and work to change it. It exists. It does not erase or lessen male responsibility for supporting and perpetuating their power under patriarchy to exploit and oppress women in a manner far more grievous than the serious patriarchal stress and emotional pain caused by male conformity to rigid sexist role patterns. That's what it says. Throughout the essay, I stress that feminist advocates collude in the pain of men wounded by patriarchy when they falsely represent men as always and only powerful, as always and only gaining privileges from their blind obedience to patriarchy. I emphasize that patriarchal ideology brainwashes men to believe that their domination of women is beneficial when it is not. It reads, often feminist activists affirm this logic when we should be constantly naming these acts as expressions of perverted power relations, general lack of control of one's actions, emotional powerlessness, extreme irrationality, and in many cases, outright insanity. Passive male absorption of sexist ideology enables men to falsely interpret this disturbed behavior positively. As long as men are brainwashed to equate violent domination and abuse of women with privilege, they will have no understanding of the damage done to themselves or to others and no motivation to change. That's what it says. Here is one of the most powerful sentences I think I have read in this book so far. Patriarchy demands of men that they become and remain emotional cripples. Patriarchy demands that we men are robots. I don't care what nobody says. They want us to be and remain robotic no matter what. That this does not matter. Only this doesn't matter. That's one of the biggest issues regarding patriarchy. So let's continue. Since it is a system that denies men full access to their freedom of will, it is difficult for any man of any class to rebel against patriarchy, to be disloyal to the patriarchal parent, be that parent female or male. The man who has been my primary bond for more than 12 years was traumatized by patriarchal dynamics in his family of origin. When I met him, he was in his 20s. While his formative years had been spent in the company of a violent alcoholic dad, his circumstances changed when he was 12, and he began to live alone with his mother. In the early years of our relationship, he talked openly about his hostility and rage towards his abusing dad. He was not interested in forgiving him or understanding the circumstance that has shaped and influenced his dad's life, either in his childhood or in his working life as a military man. In the early years of our relationship, was extremely critical of male domination of women and children. Although he did not use the word patriarchy, he understood its meaning and he opposed it. His gentle, quiet manner often led folks to ignore him, counting him among the weak and the powerless. By the age of 30, he began to assume more macho persona, embracing the dominator model that he had once critiqued. Donning the mantle of patriarch, he gained greater respect and visibility. More women were drawn to him. He was noticed more in public spheres. His criticism of male domination ceased, and indeed, he began to mouth patriarchal rhetoric, saying saying the kind of sexist stuff he would have appalled him in the past. These changes in his thinking and behavior were triggered by his desire to be accepted and affirmed in patriarchal workplace and rationalized by his desire to get ahead. We men are also gate kept by how manly we are. That's what it is. It's a gatekeeping of, oh, well, if you're not man enough, then you're not enough to be within these roles of leadership, right? You're not within these roles of acceptability. You can't be one of the boys, right? I'm telling you, man. Crazy when you think about it. These changes in his thinking and behavior were triggered by his desire to be accepted and affirmed in a patriarchal workplace and rationalized by desire to get ahead. His story is not unusual. Boys brutalized and victimized by patriarchy more often than not become patriarchal, embodying the abusive patriarchal masculinity that they once clearly recognized as evil. Few men brutally abused as boys in the name of patriarchal maleness courageously resist the brainwashing and remain true to themselves. Most males conform to patriarchy in one way or another. You're going to obey it or you're going to be destroyed. Indeed, radical feminist critique of patriarchy has practically been silenced in our culture. It has become subcultural discourse available only to well educated elites. Even in those circles, using the word patriarchy is regarded as passe. Often in my lectures, when I use the phrase imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy to describe our nation's political system, audiences laugh. No one has ever explained why accurately naming the system is funny. The laughter itself is itself a weapon of patriarchal terrorism. It functions as a disclaimer, discounting the significance of what is being named. It suggests that the words themselves are problematic and not the system they described. I interpret this laughter as the audience's way of showing discomfort with being asked to ally themselves with an anti-patriarchal, disobedient critique. This laughter reminds me that if I dare to challenge patriarchy openly, I risk not being taken seriously. Mm. Citizens in this nation fear challenging patriarchy even as they lack overt awareness that they are fearful, so deeply embedded in our collective unconscious that are rules of patriarchy. I often tell audiences that if we are to go door to door asking if we should end male violence against women, most people would give their unequivocal support. Then, if you told them that we would stop male violence against women by ending male domination, by eradicating patriarchy, they would begin to hesitate to change their position. Despite the many gains of contemporary feminist movements, greater equality for women in the workforce, more tolerance for the relinquishing of rigid gender roles, patriarchy as a system remains intact. And many people continue to believe that it is needed if humans are to survive as a species. This belief seems ironic given the patriarchal methods of organizing nations, especially the insistence on violence as a means of social control has actually led to the slaughter of millions of people on the planet. Until we can collectively acknowledge the damage patriarchy causes and the suffering it creates, we cannot address male pain. We cannot demand from men the right to be whole, to be givers and sustainers of life. Obviously, some patriarchal men are reliable and even benevolent caretakers and providers, but still they are imprisoned by a system that undermines their mental health. Patriarchy promotes insanity. Is that the root of psychological ills troubling men in our nation? Nevertheless, there is no mass concern for the plight of men. In Stiff, the betrayal of the American man, Susan Faludi, includes very little discussion of patriarchy. She says, ask feminists to diagnose men's problems, and you will often get a very clear explanation. Men are in a crisis because women are properly challenging male dominance. Women are asking men to share the public reins, and men can't bear it. Ask anti-feminists, and you will get a diagnosis that is, in one respect, similar. Men are troubled. Many conservative pundits say because women have gone far beyond the demands for equal treatment and are now trying to take power and control away from men. The underlying message: men cannot be men, only eunuchs, if they are not in control. Both the feminist and anti-feminist views are rooted in a peculiarly modern American perception that to be a man means to be at the controls and at all times to feel yourself in control. That's what she says. Faludi never interrogates the notion of control. She never considers that the notion that men were somehow in control, in power, and satisfied with their lives before contemporary feminist movements is false. Patriarchy as a system has denied males access to full emotional well-being, which is not the same as feeling rewarded, successful, or powerful because of one's capacity to assert control over others. This is absolutely true. Here's the thing. Some of us who are more in touch with our feelings, have more emotional regulation, what do they call us in some of these male circles, especially the ones that are in the manosphere? They will use the term beta. What does that mean? That means that you are not appealing, you are not acquiescing to the patriarchal standards, thus meaning you are not enough of a man in order to be deemed as one of us. And what does that do to some of us that have more emotional regulation, that do consider the feelings of others, that do consider and allow ourselves to feel the full range of emotions that a human being should be allowed? Well, then we are talked down to. We are otherized. We're pushed to the side. And that leads us to feel like we are less than. That's what happens. So this is one of the biggest issues. It leads a lot of men to think of themselves as less than. Why do you think then some of these guys end up becoming school shooters? Why do you think they somehow start treating women in such a horrible way? Because they feel like, oh, well, I can never make it ahead because I'm somehow less than. And some of them become creeps. Because they're always being judged by this rule, right? That you're not man enough if you don't and then insert these patriarchal standards. Patriarchy is a system that has denied male access to full emotional well-being, which is not the same as feeling rewarded, successful, or powerful because of one's capacity to assert control over others. To truly address male pain and male crisis, we must, as a nation, be willing to expose the harsh reality that patriarchy has damaged men in the past and continues to damage them in the present. If patriarchy were truly rewarding to them, the violence and addiction in family life that is so all pervasive would not exist. This violence was not created by feminism. If patriarchy were rewarding the overwhelming dissatisfaction most men feel in their work lives, a dissatisfaction extensively documented in the work of Studs Terkel and echoed in Faluti's treatise, would not exist. In many ways, Stift was yet another betrayal of American men because Faluti spends so much time trying not to challenge patriarchy that she fails to highlight the necessity of ending patriarchy if we are to liberate men. Patriarchy damages us. Rather, she writes, instead of wondering why men resist women's struggle for a freer and healthy life, I began to wonder why men refrain from engaging in their own struggle. Why, despite a crescendo of random tantrums, have they offered no methodical, reasoned response to their predicament? Given the untenable and insulting nature of the demands placed on men to prove themselves in our culture, why don't men revolt? Why haven't men responded to the series of betrayals in their own lives, to the failures of their fathers to make good on their promises with something co-equal to feminism? Note that Faludi does not dare risk either the ire of feminist females by suggesting that men can find salvation in feminist movements, or rejection by potential male readers who are solidly anti-feminist by suggesting that they have something to gain from engaging feminism. So far in our nation, visionary feminist movements is the only struggle for justice that emphasizes the need to end patriarchy. No mass body of women has challenged patriarchy, and neither has any group of men come together to lead the struggle. The crisis facing men is not the crisis of masculinity, it is the crisis of part patriarchal masculinity. Until we make this distinction clear, men will continue to fear that any critique of patriarchy represents a threat, distinguishing political patriarchy, which he sees as largely committed to ending sexism. Therapist Terence Real makes it clear that patriarchy damages us all, is embedded in our psyches. Patriarchy is a threat to men. Basically, he says psychological patriarchy is the dynamic between those qualities deemed masculine and feminine, in which half of our human traits are exalted while the other half is devalued. Both men and women participate in this tortured value system. Psychological patriarchy is a dance of contempt, a perverse form of connection that replaces true intimacy with complex, covert layers of dominance and submission, collusion and manipulation. It is the unacknowledged paradigm of relationships that has suffused Western civilization generation after generation, deforming both sexes and destroying the passionate bond between them. By highlighting psychological patriarchy, we see that everyone is implicated, and we are free to form the misconception that men are the enemy. To end patriarchy, we must challenge both its psychological and its concrete manifestations in daily life. There are folks who are able to critique patriarchy but are unable to act in an anti-patriarchal manner. To end male pain, to respond effectively to male crisis, we have to name the problem. We have to both acknowledge that the problem is patriarchy and work to end patriarchy. Terence Real offers this valuable insight. The reclamation of wholeness is a process even more fraught for men than it has been for women, more difficult and more profoundly threatening to the culture at large. If men are to reclaim the essential goodness of male being, if they are to regain the space of open-heartedness and emotional expressiveness that is the foundation of well-being, We must envision alternatives to patriarchal masculinity. We must all change. That is the entirety of chapter 2. The next chapter is chapter 3, being a boy. I cannot wait to get into that. Look, this chapter was that good. Look, and here's the thing. A lot of people just do not realize that patriarchy is also just as damaging to us as it's damaging to women. Because we are held to these standards that we have to constantly measure up to that we just can't. Or if we fail to, then that means that we are less than, when in reality we're not. And so we have to free ourselves from these shackles as well. And that's the thing. And this also goes into how we relate and how we associate with people who resist these patriarchal standards, i.e., a lot of us gay men, a lot of bisexual men, as well as those who are masks, who are gender non-conforming or non-binary, or how we associate with people who are trans men, how we associate with them. That's what's important too. And so how we relate to them, how you relate to people like me, like you could be a straight guy, how you relate to people like me. Because look, I'm a dude, right? Let us hang out. You're one of the boys, right? But are we going to let patriarchy get in that way? No. We should just be fully ourselves, fully human. There was a podcast called Man Enough Podcast. They had on Dr. Joy DeGruy, who is a sociologist and a professor. And she talks about how men in one country, they didn't specify, were living just as long as women. Because typically women live longer than men, especially in Western cultures. But in this country, they actually lived the same length of time. Well, why was it? Well, because men were also initiating the same traits that women were when it came to especially difficulties in life. When women have difficulties in life, they do not seclude themselves like men do. They actually come together and they actually work out through the problem. The problem with a lot of us men is patriarchy is you got to be a man. You got to do everything on your own. Patriarchy also reinforces the individualistic mindset that keeps us in the place that we are right now in this country, within the Western world. Going against that is going against patriarchy. And men in this country actually did that. And guess what? They actually live longer. Because it promotes community, right? Why do you think we guys love team sports so much? Community. Right? Community is something that men absolutely love. But that's technically considered a feminine trait. But it helps us live longer. See how patriarchy actually hurts us? We gotta do that. We gotta get ourselves out of that. I'm glad that Bell Hooks brought that up. So yes. Now, thank you so very much. Did you like the stream? Go ahead and give the stream a like. This pushes me out into the algorithm. Thank you so very much for that. Also, if you have not, please make sure to subscribe to my Substack at jaybefaunt.substack.com. And now I also would like to give a shout out to patrons on Patreon, as well as on Coffee, and anybody that sends me any mutual aid through PayPal. So thank you so very much to all of you for your support of the channel. It means the world to me. And so thank you. And yes, just to let you guys know, I am still demonetized. So if you guys like to support the channel, you can support via Patreon or PayPal. And with that being said, I just want to share with you guys what you get when you support JB. So here are the tiers. So thank you so very much. Here we go. We have JB members, Solidarity, Comrades, Jaybefaunters, Super Jaybefaunters, Super Duper Jaybefaunters, and Mega Jaybefaunters. So thank you so very much for your support. And just want to I thanked them already last stream, but we'll do it again. Thank you so much, John Paul O'Neill, Amanda Brinkley, and Ghost Nest for becoming patrons on Patreon. Thank you very much. All right. So, with that being said, you have reached the end of the stream. I just want to thank you guys so much. Also, just to let you guys know, not only will I continue the reading of Bell Hooks, but we will also continue the reading of Water in the Spirit, Ritual, Magic, and the Initiation of Life of an African Shaman by Maladoma Patrice Somé. We will continue that. And in addition to, and furthermore, we're going to continue the reading of Laziness Does Not Exist by Dr. Devon Price. We're going to continue that reading because I want to finish this book because it is valuable information. Yes. So thank you so very much. I want to thank all of you from the top and bottom of my heart for showing up for this book. I would imagine this book isn't very popular among men, especially because, well, the talk of patriarchy and things like that. But it's good for us to learn what systems of oppression that do exist so that we can also help each other so that we can actually liberate ourselves. Because we got to remember, like, we also need to break the chains of this system that puts us in these little boxes, right? Like, I'm a grown man. Don't put me in no damn box. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do, right? So why should I have to go by some arbitrary rules that some dudes decide to want to enforce because, your daddy did it, and your uncle did it, and your granddaddy did it. So what that got to do with me? I'm a grown-ass man. Let me do my thing, right? And that's the same thing when it comes to, resisting patriarchy. Like, nah, bro. Like, I'm going to do my thing. You do yours. You do you. You be who you are truly deep in your heart. And by the way, don't let nobody tell you that you cannot express your full range of emotions. You're not a robot, bro. You're a grown man. And grown men have hearts, right? That's who we are. And don't let anybody tell you because you're a man, you can't be nurturing. Nah, bro. You can't be nurturing. We can do and be anything that we want. Why? Because you're a man, baby. And it's the same thing goes to women. Don't let nobody tell you that you can't be who you truly are. And anybody that's non-binary, gender non-conforming, well, you already halfway there. You can be whoever you want. But do it in service to your fellow human beings. That means compassion, kindness, honesty, altruism. Be that. And love your fellow humans. Love your planet, man. Or person. That's what it's all about. So, thank you so much for tuning in. Look, like I always say, water your plants, water yourselves, leave the world better than you found it. Smoke them if you got them, drink them if you got them. If you ain't got them, then look. Just watch something funny or read because joy is revolutionary. Why not, right? Even if it's an audiobook, you got to listen to it. That's fine. Go ahead and do the damn thing. But I'll catch you in the next one. Oh, to all of you, and I don't care who you are. Look, man, woman, non-binary, I don't care. You get a forehead kiss. Mwah. Why? Because I love you. And I'm going to love you to the end of time. I'm going to love you to the end. Tick, 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 tick. Bye! Thank you so very much for watching my channel. And I deeply appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. If you wish to support the channel further, so I can keep bringing you content that is educational and informative, you can become a patron on patreon.com/Jaybefaunt. You can find that link in the pinned comment or in the description below. No matter what you give, you'll be supporting independent media and education that helps make the world better. Thank you so much, and you can watch more of my content here. Mwah. Forehead kisses, and have a beautiful day.